Good evening, folks.
Hi, Broderick. Are we live, Larry?
Hi, Broderick.
Now we are, yes.
Okay, great. So tonight is May 18th, 2021. It is 7:01. I'm Lisa Shanahan. I'm bringing to order the Common Council Ordinance Committee. It's a regular meeting, and I'll just call the roll. David Hooverman.
Present.
Here. Dominique Johnson is here.
Present.
Tom Keegan.
Here.
Manny Langella is not here. Tom Livingston
Here.
is here. We're missing Kadeem Roberts. Maybe I didn't know that he wasn't here, but hopefully he will attend. And then there's me. I think we still have a quorum though, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have
Yes,
5.
we do.
So we do. We've got a quorum. So that is the roll call. And the next thing is do we have a public hearing on your gender things today? Dominic, no?
Hold on one second. Let me double check.
I know, I was just like, are we just going to vote to take that to public hearing, I think, right?
So there's no public hearing. The first thing on our agenda is the minutes from April 2021.
We're voting to take our thing to public hearing.
So
Okay.
under old
Public
business. Yeah. So public comment, then we have acceptance of the minutes, and then we have a couple items that were discussed at the last meeting. And then there was conversation about 2 of them potentially going to a public hearing, depending on how this goes.
Perfect, exactly. That's what I thought we were doing. So do we have anybody for public comment today? Anybody in the waiting room?
We have 2 people. One is dialed in. If you'd like to address the ordinance committee, please raise your hand electronically now and I will unmute you. I don't see anyone.
Okay, so we have no one for public comment. So the next order of business is the acceptance of the minutes. And we do have a couple of changes. I previewed them with Brian, but I'll put them into the record. So under public hearing for the last meeting, we're making amendments to the minutes for the April 2021 meeting. In the very first paragraph, we're changing the 4th line down to read, "She said she praised this committee and hoped that they would approve the gender neutral language." The second change we have under public hearing discussion is, I'm rewriting the very last sentence of that. Ms. Shanahan said the alternative would have been to revise each of the ordinance in the code, which would have been time and cost prohibitive.
Hold on. So it's just each instead of all?
Yes, I said, Otherwise we have to read, each of the ordinances in the code. It doesn't matter, could be all. What do you think?
Each of is fine.
Okay. Then under old business, last paragraph, Ms. Shanahan said that she's reluctant to move forward with that language because there's no legal definition of romantic orientation. And then the next sentence we changed it to say, Ms. Huab said it was safe to keep the definition as sexual orientation to be comprehensive. Did you get that?
Where are we, Lisa?
That's under old business. Mr. Hooverman, it starts that paragraph that starts Mr. Hooverman.
Right. So we're all right. So move forward with that language.
With that language. Yep.
Then Ms. Sweep said it is safe to keep the definition of sexual orientation to be comprehensive.
Right. Then under new business in the very first paragraph, are you there?
Yes.
I think I sent you those changes. The last sentence, he said, not here, but there are talks of the state of Connecticut.
Yep.
Okay, you got that one. And then in the next paragraph, first sentence, Mr. Soar explained his request and said that people have been driving to Norwalk from down south and buying both legal and illegal fireworks. And in that same paragraph, in the next sentence, his proposal is to inspect and to charge a fee. And then the very last change is in the next paragraph that starts with Mr. Keegan. And in the second to last sentence, the possession of other types of fireworks.
Yes, got that. Yep.
All right, so good. We are all set. So with those amendments, do I have a motion to accept the minutes as amended? Mr. Livingston, all in favor? I think we have everybody. Great, it's unanimous. Great. So the next thing we have on our agenda is old business, and we're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 59A, Housing Equal Opportunity. And once again, we have Ms. Johnson to thank for doing the heavy lifting on the changes in this ordinance. We had a couple little changes we were going to make to include some citations, and I'll let Dominique describe the changes that we made in both. And I think we can talk on 59A and 60 to discuss and vote in Chapter 60, Human Relations, at the same time, because the changes were similar, if you would. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chair. Want to also thank Matt Sapienza and Corporation Counsel. He really was the one that worked with Ms. Suib, the acting for housing, to make sure that the statutes synced up and were the correct ones, as you see in the packet. So really, as Lisa said, this is our definition, expanded definition of discrimination that I don't believe changed since last time. If it did, we made those edits. I think this is the same. The only difference here are the added statutes, which again, Attorney Sapienza corresponded to that in the state statutes. So like the code rather now reflects the state statute, the relevant state statute.
That's accurate, Dominique. After the last meeting, we had a discussion about making sure that 59A and 60 tracked, and we were talking about, the definitions and everything. And then there was a concern raised by Margaret that we needed to make sure that the statutes in there were accurate. And so this committee wanted Corporation Counsel and the committee to go back and ensure that those were accurate, and then come back prior to making any further decisions on these two the sections that are identified here.
Mr. Livingston.
I can't read well enough and know. I think there still has to be a couple conforming changes to the language. They're not identical in terms of commas, and also one says present or past or present. It's not that it's really changes anything, but I am always concerned if we have the same language in different statutes and they're slightly different, somebody might think there's a reason for it. So I think we should just go back, and I can help with this to make sure they're identical in terms of commas and phrasing. I can give it to you separately, Brian, but I think it's great. Otherwise, they're just little nits.
Yeah, that's fine. We want to make sure it's right.
Are people comfortable with voting it to go to public hearing with those nits and nats?
I just had a question, Chairman. Just to make sure, when I'm reading in the source material that Attorney Sapienza provided with the highlighted titles that we've gone through, we're not missing anything in those references. Is that correct?
My understanding is he's gone through this 3 times, but Dominique, maybe you would.
That is my understanding as well. It was mainly at this point, he and Margaret Suib that went through to make sure it worked. And frankly, I think Attorney Sapienza did it and double checked it twice. I did have actually a clarifying question, which probably forced him to go into it a 3rd time. So I feel
a couple of the titles sound like I haven't read the actual statute, so I don't know. That's why a couple of the titles sounded like they might cross-reference, but if they've gone through it, I trust that then that we're synced up correctly.
That's my understanding as well, based on conversations. Yep.
Okay, we take one chapter at a time just for clarity of the record. So is there any further discussion on Chapter 59A, Housing Equal Opportunity? So I think the thought would be that we would take this to public hearing, subject to the nits and nats that Mr. Livingston will work with Dominique to clean up to conform the language.
And Lisa, just so you know, I mean, if there is a time crunch, we're sending them to public hearing, and that allows the public to speak. And there can also be additional changes that could be made at that time. And even if there were further changes, if it was sent to Common Council, those changes could be made at Common Council. So this committee at least has one more shot with it formally at the next committee meeting before it even gets to Common Council, if it goes there, just so you're aware.
Thanks for reassuring all of us who really worry about things like that. David, did you have something you wanted to
No,
say?
I was going to say I'm happy to move Chapter 59A to public hearing.
That'd be great. Shall we take a vote? Is all in favor? Everybody agrees. It's unanimous. That's terrific. So again, the next item on the list is discuss and vote on Chapter 60, Human Relations Commission, Section 60-1, 60-2, and 60-5. And I am expecting Mr. Livingston to say he has the same nits and nats that he might want to clean up.
Actually, I don't think there are. I think it was just in the other one, but I think we just have to double check. So Brian can double check.
We can double check that. And the other thing I just want to make clear is, so this has been on, these two, 59A and 60 have been on. This is the third time. So 59A, I think it's 1 and 2. Let me just double check. I want to make sure I'm not talking out of turn here. So during all of the meetings, 59A-1 and 59A-2 were on. The first time that 60 came on, it was 60-1, 60-2, and 60-5. So those all three have been on a meeting prior to today. The last meeting, 60-1 and 60-2 were on, 60-5 was not. But under the concern that they wanted to make sure that the statutes were there and sync up, you asked that 60-5 be placed back on. So all of the sections have been on at least twice. And with the exception of 60-5, all the other sections in 59A and 60 have been on. This is the third time. But 60-5, this would be the second time that it was on. So this is not something that's new. It's been on at least twice now. So just so everyone's aware.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So I would also entertain a motion to bring this to public hearing at our next meeting. Mr. Livingston. Great. All in favor? It's unanimous. Great. So we've gotten through 59A and 60, and then the next item on our agenda is to discuss Chapter 38, Article 2, Fireworks and Firecrackers, Section 38.7 through 38.13. And in this matter, I'd like to thank Mr. Livingston for taking the laboring oar on doing a little bit of drafting for us. And he, I mean, not a little bit of drafting, a lot of drafting. So it's terrific to have this. Thank you very much, Tom, for giving us this language to take a look at this evening. We're not going to vote to move this forward today. We're just discussing this. So we want to, I think we all still have some questions for Mr. Sawyer.
Yep,
So,
I'm here for you.
Thanks
Thanks for having me.
Broderick.
you. Thanks for being here for us. We love that.
Yeah, thank you, Broderick.
Anytime, anytime.
Yeah, and so I have like several questions. I guess I'll just kind of go through mine, and then as other people fill in, let's.
I like 3-part questions.
You like 3 or 4 at once?
Yes.
I'll just go one at a time. You can answer them one at a time.
Okay.
Okay, so in the lower section, 38.7A, one of the questions I had is, do we want to add a duty to notify you as the fire marshal when people want to sell firecrackers? I mean, how would it be that you would?
That would be in our TNT Fireworks is going to be sending me a list of who they sell the fireworks to. So like Walgreens, Costco, once they send me that, I'll have the folks that are reputable selling them. The others, I don't know if I'll be able to get to a notification with them. I mean, if you have a little bodega, how I'm gonna have to check on that.
Yeah, because the thoughts we had was, I mean, I think you're less worried about Walgreens and Walmart, maybe more worried about the bodega. So if they have a duty to inform you, then at least maybe you'd have a right to inspect. We were just kind of wondering how that might be tied together.
Okay, well, the right to inspect for us is covered in Connecticut general statutes. Between the hours of 9 and 5, if they're open and we walk in, we see something, we can cite it. So I don't think that's going to be an issue with access for us because we have a broad brush with that. I can't think of any reason we would be held up. And even if they say you can't come in, we can get an administrative warrant if we need to.
Okay. Would you like the right? Would you like to be notified who they're selling it?
Well, every little bit helps. But if they're driving down south and picking them up, every little bit helps. I mean, I'll leave it at that. Whatever we can do to make it stronger. But let me make sure I have this clear. When you say notification, that would be
people decide that they want to sell. Well, they can only sell sparklers, right? And fountains, as we
sparklers and fountains for now.
Right. So I'm just asking. So would you want people who want to do that, if a bodega wants to do that, to send you a note and say, "Hey,
yes, they would. Oh, yes, they would definitely need that. But if I don't know. If I was a bodega owner, I probably wouldn't say anything if I knew they were legal.
I
Can
don't
we,
think-
can we make them notify us if they're,
Lisa, I don't think anybody who's selling illegal fireworks is gonna send a
No,
notice.
no, no, not the illegals, but for,
Yeah.
I mean, because I'm just
Well,
thinking.
are you referring, Madam Chairman, are you referring to a, like an application process that they would apply to have the right to sell
If we're gonna
within
put
the
them
city,
through inspections and we're
which
gonna. tell
becomes a
them that-
notification?
Yeah, if we're gonna put them, Kadeem Roberts, I would like to note at 7:16 join the meeting. I'm just wondering if we want to say that if you're selling sparklers, you should let us know. So you're subject to inspection, because we're saying that they're subject to an annual inspection. So that's one way for them to notify us that it's time for their inspection. But maybe, I mean, if Tom's
it can't hurt, Lisa.
point is right,
Yeah.
if you're not selling legal ones, you don't want
Yeah.
people to come on over.
It can't hurt.
Well, I think the other part of this that I think is in here is if somebody is, obviously we can only oversee the selling of legal fireworks. Obviously, if they're illegal fireworks, the statutes allow fire marshals and police officers to confiscate them and destroy them. But part of what we're trying to do here is not only provide Broderick with an ordinance that of something that he has to do anyway, but then we're trying to give the carrot and stick approach of, listen, you have to do this, you have to do an application and get an inspection done. And if you do it in a timely fashion, it's free. And if you don't, then you're going to be fined and it's not going to be free. And so I think that's the incentive for the businesses that are doing this legally, is that it's a freebie or potentially really inexpensive if you do it the right way. And if you don't and you're caught, then it's going to be costly, because as you can see, it's basically right now what we have is $200 for the initial, and each day that the violation exists is another separate violation. So that adds up pretty quick. And maybe it doesn't impact Walmart that much, but a smaller business, maybe it's still $200 a day, but a smaller business it would affect. And we're giving them incentive to do this by saying it's free or extremely reasonable, depending on what the language that everyone wants. We're just trying to give them an incentive so that Broderick doesn't have to go chase these people down, but for them to come to him and say, hey, we're selling them and we want you to come in because we're doing it the right way.
That was the way I was thinking. Like, I was wondering what would trigger this? How would we trigger it with little bodegas? So that was my question on that. So I guess we'll take that under advisement, but whether we should be adding a duty to do that.
I'll think about that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd like to hear what you think. I mean, think about it and think what you
Well,
say. So Tom, you had a question lower. It says fire marshal shall have the right to inspect for any.
Yeah.
You want to exit?
Well, yeah, and I don't know, Broderick, I think you may have just touched on this, but it says, the last sentence is, the fire marshal shall have the right to inspect any mercantile establishments, businesses, and or properly permitted events at any time. For any, I mean, guess my question was, this is very broad. I mean, it could be read to be broader than fireworks. Do you have that right? That's broader than fireworks?
yes. If I believe one of the statutes gives us the right of entry for pretty much, I think it's 29305. 29305D covers the right of entry.
Because what I was thinking, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
What I was thinking here, just because we're dealing with the fireworks here, is we could add at the end of this sentence, for purposes of, carrying out the intent of this section or something like that. But if you have a broad right anyway, maybe we don't need to do that. So maybe we should take a look at that other provision.
Yeah, I do. I wrote that down because I was looking at it because I thought I saw a question on that.
Yeah, that's my question. Yeah, for any purpose.
Yeah, I think we can, from what I read of the statute, we can do whatever we need to do to get into the building, as long as it's between the hours of 9 and 5.
Right. It says right of entry at all reasonable hours into or upon any premises within the local fire marshal's jurisdiction for the performance of his or her duties, except that occupied dwellings and habitations exclusive of common use passageways and rooms in tenant houses, hotels and rooming houses may only be entered for inspection between the hours of 9 and 5.
Which means our language isn't accurate because it says at any time.
Right. Except in the event of any emergency, and we don't have that language in there. So We probably need to take a look at 29305 subsection D.
Okay, I
Yeah,
see
let's
what you're
take-
saying, Tom.
Yeah, let's tinker with that a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
Good idea. Okay, so then my next section was under license for exhibitions and under those sections. And one of the things that caught both Mr. Hubelman's eye and mine was when we were talking about only to one skilled in the discharging of fireworks. We thought that's kind of vague and like who's skilled. And when I looked at the state statute, they actually had kind of a definition of people who are skilled. But I'm wondering how you feel about that language and if that should be tightened up.
I think the language in the statute is spot on. I think it's 29. I'll get this down here. It basically shooters have to be licensed by the state to do it. 29349, 29364, and 365 covers the licensing and the certification for the shooters, or what do they call them, jobbers.
And is there a defined term so we can tie it back to that in some way?
We've always called them shooters here. That's what I know. But the statute says jobbers. So either or, fireworks technician, I've heard too.
Is there a licensing body of some
Yes.
kind, or and do they have to have a certificate or some sort of training? Then they have to
Yes.
prove that training?
Yes. State of Connecticut covers the licensing. It's not consumer protection.
They call it certificate of competence under the state
Yes.
statute. So
Yes.
I don't know if we should maybe, I think that maybe we ought to tie some of that language in.
Yeah,
because-
utilize some of that language.
To add it to that. So if we have the state statutes, we still would have to add it to our chapters, because I recall seeing 305 and 306 in our charter. So I just thought Connecticut General Statutes was a broad brush for us to use for anything, but I see, okay, that makes sense. It's chapters got to be spot on.
So
Okay,
you'd like that language to be tightened too? We could work, that would be helpful.
I would take it directly from Connecticut General Statutes and plop it right in.
Mr. Livingston, you have a.
Yeah, if I might, let's take a look at language. We don't need to duplicate everything that's in the state statute. And in fact, it sets us up for problems down the road if something
point, Tom.
changes. So I think maybe we can couch it in language that, as defined under Connecticut state statutes or something. It's just a
That works.
cleaner way in my mind.
That's
Yeah,
a broad brush to that.
Cite the statute, because if the statute gets recoded, then we can't,
Yeah.
it gets confusing.
But I think we need to, in that, to add to what you're saying, Madam Chairman, that the under license for exhibition, somewhere in there, we need to reference those statutes that say this is what a qualified shooter is.
I think so too.
Right.
And then Broderick, one last thing in that paragraph at the very bottom, it talks about different insurance and property damage amounts. Is that something we could just refer to in the fire code rather than, because these amounts are obviously dated, not
where-
accurate. Does the fire code handle those types of things? Is that done in the licensing
with-
or permitting process?
With the fireworks, again, it goes back to Connecticut General Statutes 29359. That covers the liability and the insurance requirements.
So we shouldn't list that here. I mean, if we're cleaning up the statute, we
don't-
probably ought to address that.
I don't believe you need to. When they take these events out, it's what's it, $1 million coverage that they have to require. So I really don't believe you would have to go that far into it.
Okay, because these amounts are, this says property damage of $1,000. Mr. Livingston, were you?
Yeah, I was going to say, make reference to, whatever Parks and Rec requires, or the city
It's,
requires.
Lisa, Broderick's correct. It's 29359. It says proof of financial responsibility, liability insurance. It's a long paragraph, but at one point it does indicate such policy shall cover public liability arising out of the operation of the fireworks display or use or from the use of pyrotechnics for special effects, and the minimum amount of $1 million per accident for bodily injury and property damage, and shall not limit the coverage within the applicable statutory period of covered liability. So not only would this be something that we have to discuss, but obviously when people come in for permits, whether it's for this or something else, they typically have to have an insurance policy covering, listing the city as an additional insured, so that if heaven forbid something were to happen, that we can then turn our liability isn't there and we can turn it over to their insurance company for this. So for that reason, you're correct. The language is dated. It's not only dated and it isn't sufficient, but it's also contrary to what the state statutes say.
Right. So if we're working on this anyway, my view would be that we clean this up, and probably under the license fee, $5 seems a little cheap too. So we'll address that at the same time. And did I have anything else? Anybody else have issues? Those were the highlights for me. Oh, I had one other thing before I go. So hazardous locations for exhibitions. I'm wondering, Broderick, if some of these things are also not necessarily, I mean, are they or are they not compliant with the fire code? Because it talks about 200 feet of this and 200 feet of that. And I just want to make sure that, to the extent that our fire code may have changed, that these are not inaccurate measurements.
Oh, for the proximate audience?
It says, yeah, or combustible buildings and things like that, under 3810, hazardous locations for exhibitions.
Okay, I'll take a look at the,
I just want to make sure that we don't have anything that contradicts other places of either the fire code or other statutes.
I don't believe so, but I'll take a look at 1124 and 1126 in regard to NFPA standards in regard to that.
That'd be great. Those are my questions. Do other members of the committee have questions?
3810, okay.
All right, so I guess what we'll do is we'll come back. Broderick will put our heads together, changes to conform to what we've talked about today, and then we'll bring it back to the committee next month. That'd be great.
I
So,
can only.
I'm
I hope
sorry?
the rest of my nights is easy.
Thank you, Broderick.
So that's-
you're
Thanks,
very
Broderick.
Very
Thank
welcome.
you for joining us.
Thanks,
My
Broderick.
pleasure. You folks have a great night. I'll work on this tomorrow, Brian.
All right, thanks. You can call me.
All right, thank you.
All right, so the last thing on our agenda is the discussion of the possible merger of the planning and zoning commissions. And I just want to thank Mr. Livingston to bring this to our attention. I remember my first day on council, Tom said this was something he's been thinking about for a long time to streamline the land use processes as well as to lighten the load of our very competent and very hardworking volunteer commission members. So Tom, I'm going to turn this part of the meeting over to you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think some people may say it may not lighten the load, and that's one thing we're going to address. But yeah, I've been thinking about this along with others for a number of years. And now with the recent completion of the POCD and the support of the mayor's office, it seems an appropriate time to move this forward, at least have the discussion. So I want to give a little history, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jess and Steve. And then we also have Lou Schulman and Fran D'Amelio, the chairs of the zoning and planning commissions respectively, for their thoughts. But anyway, so just a little history. So the city had separate planning and zoning commissions until 1971, when they were combined following a charter amendment. And then they were separated again in 1988. So the reasons for combining them today are the same as they were in 1971. And I've done a fair amount of research with Steve's help with this and others, and I've spent time in the North Library, actually, and I thank them. But I want to read some things historically because I think they're still true today. So back in December 18th of 1970, the then chairman of the Planning Commission, Harold Osgood, wrote to the chair, the chair of the President of the Common Council, saying the primary reason for the combination of the planning and zoning commissions is that all of the physical development decisions of the city should be based upon a consistent set of policies or goals. Thus, is it expected that the planning commission should, in its preparation of the master plan, set those objectives which it approves together with the Common Council. Inasmuch as zoning is one of the most effective means of influencing or controlling the distribution of land uses in the city, the commission should have a direct part to play in the preparation of the zoning regulations and map to ensure that they reflect the master plan's goals and objectives. And as will be discussed by Jess and Steve, it's also what we're talking about now is consistent with the recommendations of the current POCD, and it will make the city's process and zonings more efficient for applicants. And Jess and Steve will talk about that a little bit. Next question is, why were they separated in 1988 if it's such a good idea? And looking over historical records, it suggests that they were separated for purely political reasons. In fact, even over the then Mayor Esposito, I'm told. And I want to read an editorial from 1988, just an excerpt, not the whole thing from the hour, that sort of sums it up. It's hard to ascertain the motives behind the proposal. That's the proposal to separate the two commissions. As we said before, one gets the feeling that the reason for the change is not that in the long run, it'll be better for Norwalk, but to punish the members of the existing commission. We certainly hope that it's not being used as a political vehicle by any individual or group. Unfortunately, the situation has become totally politicized. So, and it's worth noting that the hour argued strongly for a combined commission, as did others like the Chamber of Commerce at the time. So anyway, all that's to say that, you know, it was brought together. I mean, they were brought together in 71 for reasons that I think are still appropriate today. And it was separated for reasons that I don't think are appropriate and were in fact probably political. But let me turn it over to Jess and Steve to give their take on this and then get comments by Lou and Fran.
Thanks, Tom. So I'm going to actually pass it over to Steve. Steve completed an analysis looking at the planning committee, the planning commission and the zoning commission, and looking at how the planning commission has been set up in the past and the workload and the type of workload that they've carried over the last number of years. And so, you know, looking at the data that Steve pulled together and talking with Tom and all of his efforts, the mayor's office does support the merger, and for the reasons that Steve will get into, but I will pass it to Steve because he was the one who consolidated all the information. I think it's really helpful to go through it.
Sure. Good evening, everybody. I don't know if you have the data, or I believe you got a memo that had some data in that, which kind of laid out the, you know, the rationale and the reasons for the merger and the, you know, the benefits, and then also that would indicate, you know, the potential things to think about, you know, which could be implications of doing the merger, and also the memo outlined as well, kind of the workload, which is kind of the first step and first concern, which was everybody asks when you talk about putting the merger together. I think first and foremost, it's important to note, you know, the significant functions as defined in statute, and the significant functions also laid out in the ordinance for the planning commission itself. So two of the main functions for the planning commission, one is the kind of the oversight and then the review and potential approval of subdivision applications. And subdivision applications themselves are defined fairly clearly by statute. They're, for the most part, an as-of-right application, assuming that the applicant has met the minimum standards for the application, which is like the lot size, the lot width, you know, those kind of things. It's not an overly complex process. Norwalk is a very built community. So as you can see from and I believe you got the memo with the chart provided, that the number of subdivision applications has gone down significantly over the years. So right now we average, you know, maybe, thank you for pulling that up. I was scrambling to find that myself. There's approximately, you know, I'd say like 4 a year, which is really not a lot. And the majority of those applications you see are, you know, considered like a 2-lot subdivision, which is really kind of small. So it's usually just one lot where they've got excess land and they're able to cut off a parcel that conforms to the zoning regulations. And those applications are fairly straightforward. There's nothing really complex with them. And, you know, it is a public hearing process, but it is a very small application. The other major task outlined in state statute is the preparation of the Planning, Conservation, and Development, which we call the citywide plan, which the commission approved in 2019. And that's a 10-year document. So while that's a significant cost and time consumer for the Planning Commission and the city as a whole, it only happens once every 10 years. The Planning Commission is also tasked by statute to look at 824 referrals, which basically are when you're conducting improvements to municipal property. The improvements need to go to the Planning Commission before council can approve them. And the Planning Commission makes a finding of whether those improvements are consistent with the citywide plan. A lot of times you'll see those 824 referrals come from Alan Lowe's office, or perhaps from Department of Public Works. and then they ultimately go to common council. At the end of the day, common council can, so say the planning commission says, we don't feel this improvement is consistent with the citywide plan. Common council can override that decision by a 2/3 vote of the council. The one thing that's kind of unique, and I think is a good thing for the city, is the ordinance tasks the planning commission with looking at the capital budget and the capital requests that come from the various departments to see if those requests are in line with the citywide plan. It's kind of consistent with the 824 process where the departments come in and they make their requests to the planning commission and they say, this is why we're doing it. They put the justification together. Similar process to what you guys probably see on the council level as well as BET. And then the planning commission adopts a capital budget, which then gets forwarded to the mayor's office for consideration. Now that is, from the zoning commission's workload would be kind of a significant item that's added on. Currently, that would probably add, I would say, 3 additional meetings to the zoning commission's workload. They probably, at least for my recommendation, would be handled from a subcommittee basis. I don't think everybody would want to be involved with every one of those meetings with the various departments. But the public hearing could probably be handled as part of their normal hearing process, because the public hearing is usually a little less time than the overall, the different department level meetings. This year, we actually kind of cleaned the process up a little bit. I don't know if Zoom helped or not, but we had 3 nights of department referrals, and it seemed to go quicker, and it was a little more, on point. So I think that was a good positive step that we took in that direction. So I think that's it from kind of the workload standpoint. I don't know if you have any questions about that aspect, but I'm happy to run through anything else in the memo in terms of where I think efficiencies would come from. Because I should mention that one big task that the planning commission undertakes, which I think ends up being a lot of the workload now, are referrals from the zoning commission on either amendments to the zoning regulations or amendments to the zoning map. And to be honest, I think that's really a duplicative effort, because the zoning commission ultimately can decide to vote against what the planning commission's recommendation is, similar to what the 824 process is with council. So you're talking about an applicant having to go to the zoning commission for the actual application. It goes to the planning commission where they repeat the request and the process, and then go back to the zoning commission. So there is a lot of cost savings that go along with an applicant having to bring in their consultants for the various meetings. So those are additional time elements to that as well. So that probably adds 6 to 8 weeks to the process. And at the end of the day, I think if the 2 commissions were merged and there was a single commission looking at the applications as a whole, I think there would be a clear understanding of alignment between the citywide plan as well as what the applicant is requesting. Because right now, the zoning commission does look at the citywide plan because it's part of the resolution packet that they're given when they're looking at applications, but it's not their main focus, while the planning commission's main focus is kind of looking at the citywide plan and making sure the goals of that plan are enacted. Hopefully that wasn't too rambling and kind of cues it up for you a little bit.
If I could add just a couple items, I think one of the things that Steve mentions in the memo, which I think is really important, is that it really creates a consistent nexus with the planning and zoning in the city. And I think that that's really an important piece here. When we look at the plan for conservation development, which was passed in December 2019, there are a number of different goals and objectives that are laid out there. And one of them is the zoning study that Steve is currently leading. One of them is the industrial study that Steve's also leading. And I think that, it's really timely at this particular point that we bring planning and zoning together, because as we work through the next 12 months, next 16 months with the zoning study, what we're going to end up with is a plan for the city moving forward and a zoning update for the city moving forward. And I really feel like, Steve makes a really good point that if by bringing those 2 groups together, we really have them working as one consistent group for the city and being able to not only plan, but then not only zone, but plan at the same time and really understand what the outcomes are for the city and what what the city will look like as the next phase. So I think it's really important timing.
Does anybody have any questions for Steve or Jessica?
Yeah, if not, let's go. Let's see if Fran or Lou want to have comments.
Fran, you want to give it a shot first?
Up to you, Lou.
Please go ahead.
Okay. So, hello, everyone. I can only see one person at a time, so I'm using my phone here. And thank you, Tom, for the opportunity to be here and talk about some things. So I've been on the Planning Commission long time, good, better, and different. I was first appointed by Mayor Knopp many years ago. And I just wanted to serve in some point, and then I was appointed to the Planning Commission. So when I was first appointed and going on through the years, there was a subdivision committee and there was a land use committee under the Planning Commission. So those two committees looked at different things, but we never, I chaired both through the years. We never, it was always a full vote. We discussed it at the full Planning Commission. It wasn't in separate meetings or anything. And there were lots of subdivisions and lots of referrals from zoning. As we moved on, subdivisions, as Steve made some points here, the workload, subdivisions are few and far between. The 820, the referrals that we get, we as the Planning Commission, we can approve or deny or send our recommendations over to zoning. But zoning has if we deny something, in order to move it forward, zoning has to have a majority. But also zoning doesn't have to take any of our recommendations. They can just ignore, if you will, if they want to go a different route. The way it stands. The capital budgets, hearings, and process is intense. And Steve said there were 3 additional meetings. They really have. This year, Steve, I'm going to say it was streamlined because we've been there till 2:00 in the morning hearing departments. It was between 12 and 2 every year. So this year, I said we're going to start at 5:30 and we're going to end at 9. So I made a chairman's choice, if you will. And we did 3 nights of hearing. They went smooth and things ended by 9:30. So that was all well for everybody. I don't know why I didn't think of that before. So, but the capital, it's 3 days of the departmental hearings. Then there's a public hearing, and then there's the deliberations of when we mark up every single line item. So some of the frustration has been the left doesn't always know what the right hand is doing, meaning sometimes you would like more information on things, on items, but it's not in our purview. It's a zoning issue. So knowing more would be helpful. And the reason why the commissions were separated. Now, I never looked at this, but I've always heard that it was some legal issue, and maybe the attorney here can look it up. I don't know, because that's always that's what I heard. Not political, and maybe political was involved, but that there was some legal thing that happened that they were directed to separate the commission, but always heard, never checked into it.
Yeah, excuse me, Fran, if I could, because I saw some reference to the legal department looking into that, but ultimately it turned out there was not a legal issue, but that's just my look through the hour. So maybe there is something else.
Yeah, it's always, like I said, I never looked into it, but if there is anything else to it, I would say, look at why it was separated, and if some things can be incorporated into new ordinance that to preclude that, right? So I'm all over the place here, and you can ask me questions if you like, but I support it. I support it because I think as a, coming together as a whole and seeing the whole picture of what's happening, weighing different things, I think is a positive. I would propose that you increase the membership, the members on there. Because it's, I said, we're 8 at the planning commission, and I think you would have to do some subcommittees of these things, like Steve said, the capital budget. So a few more members. Also think about the membership. I know the mayor appoints and all that. It's hard to get volunteers, but you don't want to be, I will propose representation from the whole city, South Norwalk, East Norwalk, West Norwalk. It gives a more weighted thing because everybody has, they worry about their side of the city. So a balanced, if you will, look at a balanced membership of the commissions. So overall, sorry for running on here. I support it. I think it's a positive to put it all together, and things can be looked at as a whole as Norwalk moves forward. And I'm happy to answer questions. And I want to say that Lou and I have always had a collegiate relationship, and it's never been adversarial or anything between planning and zoning. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
Lou?
Sherman, do you have things that you'd like to say?
Yeah. The bottom line for me is the quality of the work that the commission does, and the ability of the commission to make the best decisions possible for the city. I mean, I think in a nutshell, that's where we want to be. Whether we keep 2 commissions or merge into a single commission. I am a little bit concerned, not personally, but for the members of the commission. The commission operates extremely well. It's a very collegial body. Even when there are disagreements, we get along extremely well. I can't take credit for that. The commission operated quite well before I was chair. I've simply helped carry that forward. I would, I think, like to be involved in the discussions regarding how we make this work. Simply adding additional members or new members to the commission, for example, to handle the capital budget, still puts an enormous burden on those members of the combined commission that are going to be dealing with the capital budget, because they're still dealing with the zoning issues as well. So yes, it may be less stress on the commission as a whole, but it's a fair amount of stress on those people that are dealing with that issue. If there is some way that, and I know this is 7 or 8 years out, but if there is some way of enriching the joint commission at the time of the POCD, again, to relieve it of some of the added workload associated with overseeing the POCD, I think that also would make some sense. I mean, I think as Steve has pointed out, we're already meeting somewhere between 20 and 30 times a year. Most of our meetings will run 3 or 4 hours. More recently, we've been limiting them so they don't go too late into the night, because I think we all agree that affects the quality of the decision-making. And again, the decision-making is key to what we do. I'd leave it at that. Again, welcome the opportunity to continue to be involved as you, if you're going to move this forward, as you work through some of these issues.
If I might, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you for the comments, both Lou and Fran. What I'd like to propose, if with the chair and the committee's approval, is to work with Lou and Fran and Jess and Steve to come back with a proposal for consideration at the June meeting, recognizing how much we don't want to overburden our already burdened volunteers. So I'm fully cognizant of that and want to respect your time as much as possible. So I understand, to me, that's probably the biggest hurdle we have to deal with, or one of the biggest. So I'm, as I said, I'd like to work with you, and if the committee wants to come back with a proposal, and I would suggest probably starting with the pre-1988 ordinances as a starting point. That's what we city lived with from 71 to 88. Let's see, as a starting point, let's start with that and see where it goes. But with the idea, we do whatever we can to make the burden, or not make the burden overwhelming.
That sounds good to me. Does other comment, I was gonna say other committee members' comments, David?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have is, correct me if I'm wrong, but 1-368-2 gives us the authority to do this as an ordinance under Chapter 79, correct? We don't have to get into charter revision to make this happen, correct?
No,
Okay.
that's because of the 1970 charter amendment.
Okay, so that's that 368-2. Okay. Yeah, I think this is a good idea to start exploring, seeing where we can go to find a way to codify this. It makes a lot of sense, but it also makes sense to make sure that we're being sensitive to the workload that could potentially exist in there. And I think that that's what we need to be most cognizant of as we move forward. But yeah, I'm all for it. And also happy to help in any way.
Ms. Johnson?
I'm asking a question that I think I already know the answer to, but I just am thinking out loud a bit. It seems as though, and maybe Brian, you can weigh in here, when we have commissions, there cannot be any sort of indication in an ordinance that the makeup has to be a certain way, other than, I assume, party affiliation or perhaps districts. So what might be your thoughts initially on the fact that if we were to have one commission, are we going to say that certain amount of the commission comes from A, B, C, D, so forth, R, U, D? And then what do you think the implications would be for diversity in terms of particularly like race, ethnicity, SES, gender, and so forth? I mean, that's just like where I'm thinking. We don't have to answer those questions tonight, but those are things that I'm thinking about as we think about this potential merger. If anybody has any initial thoughts, that would be cool to hear.
Ms. Johnson, I know you're not asking me the question. However, our commission does have a political breakdown. Certain number of members from each party need to be represented. And I believe that people need to be from various parts of the city so that the city as a whole is well represented. We also have term limits. We need to be reappointed. I believe it's every 2 years. My understanding, and Fran, correct me if I'm wrong, those same restrictions do not apply currently to the Planning Commission.
That's correct, Lou. The Planning Commission, we do not have term limits, and I'm an example of that. And it's a four-year term. And then it's the mayor's choice whether to, reappoint. And we also I want to add that we have a diverse group and on our Planning Commission, and it's worked out very well. And we always put the city's leave the affiliation at the door and try to do the best for the city of Norwalk.
Well, I'll just jump in and add real quick, Dominique, that at least in the times that I've looked at ordinances specifically, I have seen a requirement as to political affiliation, whether it be, for example, the Board of Ethics has that. And I've also seen, as Lou correctly pointed out, that there are certain commissions where there needs to be a breakdown geographically speaking. Those are the two that I've seen looking at the ordinances. I haven't seen others, but I haven't looked specifically for that issue. The only other thing I would add is from Steve's memo, it seems that there are municipalities that have done this and that are currently, as Norwalk is currently situated, and there's others that are not, and that's the way in which we're discussing right now. I don't know if it makes sense to try and reach out to those municipalities that are different than us right now to find out how it is that they try to minimize the impact on the volunteers so that they're not overwhelmed with this, because it seems like the meetings are already pretty long.
So I have one question along those lines. So we think we are going to have efficiencies, right? We're not going to have a matter bounce back and forth. So there should be some lightening of the load work-wise, right? Isn't that part of the thinking?
I would say yes. It's one commission, so there are. I think when we do the math based on the items that would come to the zoning, and I'm speaking solely from the zoning commission's workload because it's higher, but the matters that would be added to their workload, that would be items that the planning commission would have had jurisdiction over solely, would add maybe like one item per agenda. And I don't think from that perspective, I don't think it's a big time crunch. One thing to point out, like for Chairman Schulman's point about the citywide plan, kind of how the model we've moved to when we've been doing any one of these studies now is we put together a group that looks at these and we pull in commissioners from zoning, from planning, often from planning committee of council and some other areas. So we've kind of moved into a model where I think it makes sense going forward. We have different stakeholders based on the type of study we're doing. So I would hope that wouldn't add a lot to the workload. I think the one area, per Ms. DeMeglio's point, would be the capital budget. And I think you really need to have some folks interested in the capital budget process as a subcommittee of the overall Planning and Zoning Commission, looking at that and then understanding it's going to be a few extra nights and, pack a lunch and you'll be okay.
Any other comments, Mr. Keegan or Kadeem? Anybody else have thoughts that they'd want Tom to consider when he's working on this?
I just want to say thank you for all this information. This is very informative. Definitely where I'm at right now. It's about 12 o'clock coming up, so that's why. But sorry for coming in late.
Thanks for joining us, Kadeem. Great. Well, I think we'll set you off, Tom, and see what you come back with Jess and Steve's thoughts and Mr. Miglio's and Mr. Schulman's thoughts.
Thank you. And anybody wants to talk about it, obviously give me a call or want to be part of it. Welcome, everybody.
Great.
And thank you to Jess, Steve, Lou, and Fran for coming tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, and we appreciate the work you've done all these years. So kudos to all of you guys on that account. So that being said, I guess I'd entertain a motion to adjourn, unless there's other business that people have. Oh, both Dominique and David are right there. So it looks like we're set. Let's adjourn, and we will reconvene next month. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight.
Everybody,
Thank you.
Good night.
be safe.